You heard Miss Valley's evidence that she received a phone call from you on the 10th of September confirming a diagnosis of esophagitis and intestinal metaplasia. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you agree that that is what happened?
I have already agreed so.
And you heard Mr. Syed's evidence that he had a conversation with you on the 11th of September where, amongst other things, you again confirmed the diagnosis of intestinal metaplasia. Is that correct? You heard that evidence?
My recollection of that is less clear, but I believe that is correct.
You see, because Mr. Syed in that conversation says you spoke about a surgeon in Pretoria that does the procedure in under 45 minutes. Do you recall his evidence in that regard?
I recall his evidence. He gives a name, and I'm not familiar with that person.
And you recall in your evidence in chief, you said there are others that do it quickly. Is that correct?
Yes. In large series like one we referred to yesterday, the more they do and the more the operating time comes down.
But we will at a later stage argue that Mr. Syed's knowledge of other surgeons doing it for 45 minutes and your concession that that is the case indicates that that conversation did happen the way Mr. Syed says. Do you wish to comment on that?
I've already done so.
Do you agree that in the minds of Miss Valley and Mr. Syed, a critically important portion of the diagnosis was the presence of intestinal metaplasia?
At that stage, not.
In their minds. On the 10th of September,
I can speak for Mr. Syed. I'm not sure about Miss Valley. But I know that Mr. Syed testified publicly as to why he consented to the surgery.
you know, we're talking about his evidence under oath.
Subsequently in the court.
We're dealing with in the court, yes.
Yes, I've heard that evidence in court. It's under oath. I can tell you, I've got a court exhibit here actually, which unfortunately is not recorded. It's a list of websites of every publication and television interview that Mr. Syed gave. And the one in particular is the one where he was in his own home and he described to the interviewer how Zayan had been on medical treatment for a period of time and this had not benefited him at all, and he was suffering a lot and he was vomiting all the time, and they agreed to, for that reason, to have the surgery done. And if you look for this website, every one of them is available except that particular one that has been deleted and, as somebody said, thoroughly bleached from YouTube. And if you try to access it, it says private video. So subsequent to that, and subsequent to obviously a consultation with their attorney, they changed their tune. And it was no longer for that reason that they decided to go to surgery. It now became another reason.
Can I ask you to have a look at Exhibit ZR? My lord, the case line's reference is 3-1004. It is a WhatsApp conversation between Miss Valley and Dr. Khan. you see that Miss Valley Allo 3-1004, I believe the court is, as the court is, you see that that is a conversation between Miss Valley and Dr. Khan via WhatsApp.
I see that.
And you see she says to him a diagnosis of esophagitis, intestinal metaplasia.
Correct.
So it's clear that intestinal metaplasia played a big role in her mind at that stage.
It was obviously in her mind. I'm not going to suggest what proportion it played. It apparently did. It still remains the fact that they conceded that the reason why they decided to have surgery was for Zion's esophagitis and his ongoing symptomatology, and the intestinal metaplasia, which, as we now know, was not actually present, was an additional side issue, and it was not the indication for the surgery.
Right, you recall Miss Valley had informed you that while she was in Cape Town, from the second day, Zion had presented as being healthy.
He had improved at that time, yes. And I presume that he was being fairly inactive in Cape Town.
So just to interrupt you there, I don't think Mrs. Valley's evidence was improved. I think she said his vomiting stopped after 2 days. Do you have any comment? And she told you that.
She told me that.
Do you agree?
I've just told you.
Mr. Beale, it's going to go a lot quicker if you just answer the question, but that's fine. Now, you've heard other doctors had said that in their treatment, including Dr. Kassel, there was a letter he wrote. Dr. Khan wrote a letter that Ms. Valley in that message asked him to change the context. It was clear there were doctors who felt he suffered from anxiety. Do you dispute that he suffered from anxiety?
I'm sure he did. If you're suffering from heartburn all the time and you're vomiting all the time, you're going to be anxious. So, what is the primary cause and the secondary effect is a matter of opinion.
You recall Mrs. Valley inquired from you when conveying the information about Cape Town. She asked, can intestinal metaplasia come and go?
I don't recall that.
That was her evidence, and we will argue at a later stage that there's no reason that that aspect of her evidence should not be accepted as the truth.
Well, it may be so, but if you ask me that, my answer would have been yes. If you correct the reflux, then you can get rid of intestinal metaplasia if it's there, or prevent it from occurring or progressing.
Did you ever consider, when you were informed that the symptoms had stopped in Cape Town, that the cause of the reflux and anxiety, whichever was the primary and whichever was the secondary, was perhaps directly related to his environment? Whether it was home, school, somewhere, he had reflux and anxiety. He goes to Cape Town, reflux and anxiety goes away. Did you ever think there was an environmental problem?
I'm sure environmental problems played a role, but environmental problem is not going to occur, result in long-term chronic gastroesophageal reflux of that duration and with that degree of histological change.
So you didn't think it was worth following up that he had this 10-day period of no symptoms? You didn't think that warranted reconsideration?
It occurred to me that, told to me that he was 10 days without any symptoms at all.
Were you not told for the duration of the time in Cape Town?
wasn't told. I spoke to Mrs. Zayed after Mrs. Zayed was after they'd been in Cape Town for 2 days. I didn't speak to her again.
She say it was for the entire duration of the stay in Cape Town, or on the second day was the Cape Town, was that when the evidence on the second day of that visit to Cape Town, it was stopped.
It stopped.
Am I right?
It stopped on her second day in Cape Town, and the symptoms only returned after their return to Johannesburg.
Fair enough. I thought that the person, as you initially asked, suggested that for the entire stay in Cape Town, the entire duration of the stay in Cape Town, there were no symptoms of being back. My recollection was, I think it was on the second day. Am I correct?
Indeed, my lord. My lord, if I could refer the court in this regard to Exhibit ZZM. The case line's reference for the specific page I wish to refer to is 5-68. Z. My lord, there is a second case line's reference, but I'm not sure it's necessary for me to give it if the court has it on 5-68.
You say M or N for Natal.
M for Mike.
Thanks.
ZZN is the cause of
Indeed, my lord.
the accused, right?
Yes. And
What
it's
about
5-68, my lord. You see that note there? That's your, you confirmed that previously, that is your patient file, the notes that you made.
I did.
You see there on the 7th of October, there's an inscription in your handwriting, improvement while in Cape Town.
I do.
So on the 7th of October, you were told of an improvement on Cape Town, not only on a phone call. Is that correct?
This is when they arrived back, yes. Occurrence of symptoms since return to Johannesburg. And she showed me videos of him retching, as they refer, spewing into the toilet. And we discussed after the procedure again.
So here,
What you are trying to do is to disprove indication for surgery. And you're not taking into account Dr. Ray, the pathologist's evidence in this court, and also Dr. Virgie's findings at the ultimate post-mortem.
we will get to Dr. Ray. I just want to highlight Dr. Virgie's findings at the post-mortem is things she found post-death. So those can't be taken into consideration in determining the correctness of what your knowledge was at the time of the diagnosis. But we will come back to Dr. Ray.
Confirm significant esophagitis, particularly the findings of Dr. Virgie.
Well, we will respectfully disagree on that, and we will leave that for argument. But what is clear, 4 days before the death of Zion, you were told there was an improvement in Cape Town, and it worsened, or the symptoms returned upon his return in Johannesburg. Should that not have been a warning sign for you that there's something environmental that is causing this problem? Whether it be specific food he only eats at home, whether it be a tree in the garden, or whether it be anxiety from school. Something in Johannesburg was causing him the issues, which was absent in Cape Town. Did you ever consider that?
Is this according to an expert?
I'm asking you, did you ever consider it?
Zion had symptoms for years of reflux, and he had definite, marked histological features of reflux on his biopsy, and he was very symptomatic. Did you see Zayon at the time, being an expert?
Mr. Beale, I'd just like to remind you that you're giving your evidence to the court.
I am.
You're not giving your evidence to me, and there's a number of occasions over the last 2 days where you've addressed me by name and clearly attempted to make it personal. So I just want to remind you, you're not here at my leisure. You are here to give evidence to the court. You're addressing his lordship. You are not addressing me. I am merely here to do a job. This is not personal for me as much as you might think it is personal for me. Do you understand that?
I understand the situation, yes.
So my question was clear. Did you not consider that there might be an environmental aspect to the symptoms, seeing as in Cape Town the symptoms had subsided?
No, I did not, because that's not a known phenomenon, that environmental factors cause long-term gastroesophageal reflux.
So you were, on the 7th of October, 100% convinced a Nissen fundiplication was required and there could be no other causes other than gastroesophageal reflux disease.
The history and the medical findings is all indicated that Zayon was required an anti-reflux procedure, that he would benefit hugely from that procedure, and you could even say he was perhaps overdue to have that procedure to give him relief from what he was suffering.
Okay, if you could explain this then. You have a patient who is overdue an anti-reflux procedure. That procedure is now scheduled for the 11th of October, but on the 10th of October, you decide to have a CT scan to eliminate other causes. Is that in keeping with someone who is sure that gourd is the cause of this?
It is in keeping, but somebody who is cautious and wants to eliminate the only other possible cause that had not been ruled out by previous examinations.
You see, Mr. Beale, the state will argue at the end of the case that the history of how you have treated your patients rules you out of being described as being cautious. You don't have to comment. I'm just placing that to you as something that will be argued later. Do you have any comment?
No comment, my Lord.
Do I understand? You said the anxiety might have been secondary. Do you concede it might have been the primary issue with the reflux being secondary?
It could be either way. It could be a combination of factors, but anxiety per se is not a cause of gastroesophageal reflux, particularly not at this extent. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, I should specify.
Thank you for that. When you saw, there's just one other aspect that I wish to clarify. I understand your counsel's view on this is that it is something for argument. I just want to highlight to you that I've gone back and checked on the transcripts that are available, that even on your behalf, Mr. Green put it to Dr. Khan, a question. Mr. Green asked him on the 20th of February, do you know that Zayon was on 20 milligrams dose of Nexium previously? So there's no dispute on the version put to Mr. Green that Zayon was on 20 milligrams of Nexium at some stage.
I believe we went through this yesterday.
Yes, I know, but I'm just highlighting to you where it comes from in the record because there was a debate about it. Do you understand? Dr. Wallop's evidence in chief on the 29th of February, and it is Exhibit ZZF that it refers to, and that is contained at case lines 5-24. She said she doubled the dosage to an adult dose And ZZF is a script that indicates 40 milligrams. Did you know that?
I know that, and I don't know who actually doubled the dose. I'm not 100% sure, but I knew that he was on a dose. When he came to see me, of 40 milligrams of Nexium daily. He had been previously on the sort of standard lower dose, and the dose had been elevated to an adult dose because there'd been no response to the standard dose for his size and weight and his age, and there was no response to doubling of that dose.
I'm looking at ZZF, it's on 5-24. Is that the executive ledger?
That is the exhibit that was handed in during the time of Dr. Priya Wallop's evidence, her script. That is indeed that. The first line says 40 milligrams. My lord, I don't have the exact copy in front of me. I don't have my computer with me, and I did.
Yes, I'm able to help. If I can read it to your lordship, starting in the top left-hand corner. It says K21-0. It's on the next line, K59-0.
I see that.
Then it says Zion Sayer.
I see that.
On the next line, it says Trusting.
Yeah.
And the next line, what is then? It says 40 mg. So what looks like a C with a line, vertical line drawn, that's the 4.
There's a trough below that. Is that right?
No, my lord. In the middle of the page, on that line, so the first word is Trusting. One sees the T, the S and the T clearly.
Yes.
The next word is 40 mg. It doesn't look like it.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, Dr. Wallop and Ms. LaRue are from the same school of calligraphy.
I don't think she'll be impressed with that. But now that she's quite
I'll thank Mr. Green afterwards.
So I promise you I was struggling to find to see it because it looks like a 4 and then any. Am I right? Okay. All right.
Lord, it's true what they say about Dr. Sandor.
Okay. I was struggling. Thank you kindly.
My lord, and her evidence, just for completeness sake, was that Trustan is the generic or a generic of Nexium. That was her evidence.
Thank you for reminding me. One moment, please.
Now, Mr. Court, this is now Mr. Beale. Can I ask you in your practice, sorry, there's just one other aspect. You in your evidence in chief said that they had originally been booked for the procedure on the Tuesday and then cancelled the procedure or didn't show up. Do you recall that evidence?
I recall exactly the sequence of events, yes.
You see, because neither Miss Valley nor Mr. Syed were aware of the procedure being on the Tuesday, and neither of them were confronted with having cancelled the procedure for the Tuesday. And in your file, there's no note on the 7th of the 10th saying that a procedure was cancelled.
I'm not sure what file you're talking about, but
The file that I
the
referred
fact
to
is
you,
that Dan was initially booked on the Tuesday, and the anaesthetist that was scheduled for that day arrived for the procedure, and it was very late in the morning, probably midday, when the nursing staff informed me that they'd had a call from call from the Syed family, and they decided not to go ahead with the procedure that day. And then what happened was, it followed a conversation with Dr. Kassel, and further interaction between Mr. and Mrs. Syed, and they then changed their minds and decided, and I got a call requesting us to proceed with that procedure on the same afternoon. And this was mid-afternoon, and I had to tell them, unfortunately, they'd missed the opportunity to have the procedure done on that afternoon, and the anaesthetist who had arrived at the hospital for the procedure and had left and taken on other anesthetic work, and the next opportunity, or the next schedule was going to be on the Friday.
Were they ever billed for this no cancellation, just not pitching up?
Of course not.
You also said in your evidence in chief it was less ideal to do the procedure on a Friday afternoon. Why is it less ideal to do that procedure on a Friday?
It was less ideal at that occasion, firstly because there was a case prior to when Zayan was then booked, which meant we started a bit late. I don't think Friday afternoon going late is the most ideal time. I think Tuesday afternoon would have been a better time. But, we do what we need to do.
Ethan was also on a Friday afternoon, am I correct?
Pardon?
Ethan Tiebus's operation was also on the Friday afternoon.
That list was on a Friday afternoon, yes.
But
we didn't finish Ethan tubes into the evening.
I just want to understand correctly, does this mean that the level of care a patient will receive in a hospital is lesser on a Friday afternoon than on a Tuesday afternoon?
It shouldn't be. But you can go to any hospital for medical treatment and you may have a good experience and you may have a less perfect experience.
Is it your experience that Friday afternoons are not ideal for this type of surgery?
Not particularly, no. But, when you go into a time when there's a staff turnover at 7 o'clock in the evening, is not the most ideal time anywhere.
There was a similar problem of staff turnover with Alyssa Stradham's death, is that correct? The second HB
don't think
test
staff turnover was a
sec-
problem in the case of Alyssa Stradham. There were excellent staff members like Dr. at least Sister Ranji, who was around at the time, and others.
Maybe I misunderstood your evidence, but was there not a second HB blood test drawn that was not brought because of staff turnover time on your evidence?
That is true.
So staff turnover time again was a factor.
Yeah, it depends upon the individual as well. So, as I say, you can go to a hospital and have a good experience or a less satisfactory experience.
Do you think
And I'm not responsible for that.
Do you think the parents of Zayan Syed would have been expected to know at the time of the diagnosis and the indication of surgery that there may be issues with staff turnover times and the
No.
fact that Friday is less ideal?
No.
Were they...
What?
Carry on?
One would hope that it wasn't a problem and it wasn't less ideal. And in poor little Zayan's case, we never expected or anticipated any problem.
Okay. I just want to highlight to you two aspects of your response. The first being it was you in your evidence in chief that said Friday was less than ideal.
Less ideal than Tuesday.
Less ideal than Tuesday. Did you ever communicate to the family and say, Friday is less ideal to perform such a surgery because there's staff turnover, there's weekend, let's delay it for next week Tuesday? Did you ever say that?
No, I didn't.
And remember,
If you'd heard what Mr. Syed said in his interview, Zayan was suffering and not responded to medical treatment, and they decided to go for surgery, and they then at that stage wanted it at the earliest opportunity. But And yeah, I've set schedules, elective schedules on certain days of the week. We do emergencies at any time. But we didn't anticipate any problems in Zion's case.
I just want to...
And that it would go into a later time than we anticipated.
I just want to make sure something with you. You're constantly referring to this interview you said that has been bleached. Do you agree that that interview has never been presented in court?
It's not available to be presented.
Okay, but Mr. Syed came to court and gave evidence under oath. Ms. Valley came to court, gave evidence under oath. The court has seen those witnesses. Do you agree?
What am I agreeing to?
That the evidence was placed before this court.
What evidence?
The evidence of Mr. Syed and Ms. Valley.
No, I'm not responsible for the evidence.
Okay. And again, my question about less ideal. Remember, you told us you were a cautionary pediatric surgeon. So would a cautionary pediatric surgeon not bring to the family's attention Friday is less ideal?
No. And in fact, I did operate on Fridays, and Fridays was actually often the preferred day for families, because whereas a lot of other surgeons might prefer to operate at the beginning of the week and care for the patients throughout the week and get them discharged before the weekend, so their weekend was free. Many parents with young children would choose to be operated on a Friday, so that they'd be off work or whatever, and they could spend their time in the clinic with their child in the recovery period.
You also said you never expected anything, you had no concerns with Zion's surgery. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that is in light of your evidence that you had pre-booked an ICU bed before the surgery?
That's correct.
Doesn't pre-booking of an ICU bed imply concern? Issues about his weight, maybe?
No particular concern. You've said before, it was not a medical issue. The adult ICU where Zion went was on the same floor as the theatre, so it was not a matter of transferring him to the downstairs floor. At the time, because it was available, I preferred to have Zion in the ICU overnight rather than in the pediatric ward. That's all that it amounted to.
Okay, I just want to make sure yesterday I understood your evidence correctly. You said that the biopsy results are more definitive than the endoscopy results. Am I correct? That was your evidence yesterday.
I said that, and in explaining to Miss Valley the indication to do a biopsy, endoscopy and a biopsy, rather, for instance, than repeater contrast swallow, was a more definitive investigation, and the pathologist would then make the diagnosis. So it was an objective thing, not subjective. Now, when you do a gastroscopy, you look at the appearance of the mucosa that you're now going to biopsy, and you form an opinion and you describe it, and that finding plus the biopsy influences your decision in your diagnosis, but the ultimate diagnosis is based on the biopsy report. Now, in Zion's case, he certainly had very obvious signs of reflux esophagitis.
What I just want to clarify with you in the endoscopy, you said tongue-like wavy features were noticed at the bottom of the esophagus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did I understand correctly when you saw that and you saw metaplasia, misread the aspect about metaplasia, that confirmed in your mind those suspicious tongue-like wavy features must be the metaplasia. Is that correct?
I didn't think so at the time when I saw it.
And when you saw the biopsy?
I saw the biopsy and I read metaplasia. It could be in keeping with that. Zoan had long-term reflux. I have seen Barrett's esophagitis in a teenager and ended up doing an esophagectomy for him for lifelong reflux. So it was not outside my experience.
Now that you mention Barrett's esophagus, I understand from your evidence in chief, you had said to Mr. Syed that Zaon's condition, if the reflex remains untreated, this is on your version, remains untreated, it might develop into Barrett's esophagus. And you said thereafter there was a 20% chance it becomes malignant. Do you recall that?
20 years down the line, 20, 30 years down the line. Yeah.
But that's what you said to them. Many years down the line, there's a 20% chance it becomes malignant. Is that correct?
That is correct of that situation, yes.
Okay. And you agree with me, malignant means cancer. Something becomes malignant, cancer.
Well, malignancy and cancer are the same thing, yes.
Okay. Because you said, I never told them he will get cancer and die. But on your own version, you agree, you told him there's a 20% chance down the line he will get cancer.
I never said that there was imminent danger of him getting cancer and dying, which is what was subsequently claimed. And this was the reason to have the operation done in a hurry.
Okay, the argument will be presented by the state at a later stage why the version of Miss Valley and Mr. Syed should be accepted at the rejection of your evidence. But Mr. Syed clearly got Barrett's esophagus from you, am I correct?
I believe so, yes.
Further corroboration for his evidence about a conversation on the 11th of October 2019. Any comment?
No.
Now I'd like to know from you the reading of the Dr. Ray report, where you misread intestinal metaplasia. I'm going to get the page number for you now. I believe it is 507, 3-507. 3-507, coming out of Exhibit K, my lord.
I've got a copy.
Is the only thing
So,
my lord, I just want to place on record nothing untoward. I'm just scared the transcript is going to pick something up that wasn't clear on record. Mr. Boycer, in fulfilling his, what appears to have become his job of helping the witness to the page, the witness said to him, I've got the copy, and Mr. Boycer correctly indicated to him, use this one. That's how I understood the exchange. I'm not suggesting anything was
we don't need to
untoward.
discuss that they are identical.
My lord, I'm addressing the court. I just want that placed on record in case the transcript comes out and somebody thinks something funny was happening, whispering in court, my lord. Is the only thing...
In an ideal situation in criminal proceedings, they should have been court ordered. I don't see any man or woman in uniform to help this exercise. And as I'm sure I can certainly not blame the instructing attorney for turning up, because he's trying to help the process as it were.
It should never have been his job, my lord, Mr. Boyce. His circumstances
it has
have...
been, because there's no court order. Here we are, because we are having a sideshow and not having proper economic proceedings, and perhaps the state need to look into that.
My Lord, we have on several occasions indicated to the cells that a court orderly is required. Then it appears a court orderly is present for a day or two and then disappears again, and then upon our complaints a court orderly appears again for a day or two and then disappears. So we are as frustrated as the court by his comings and goings, if I could put it that way.
As we convey to the more senior officials based in the Beale.
It will be, my Lord. Is the only thing on this document 3-507 that you misread the aspect of intestinal metaplasia being present?
Correct.
Okay, and you heard Dr. Ray's evidence that she would expect a surgeon performing the biopsy to biopsy the most significant portion of concern.
Yeah, correct.
Is that what you did with Zayon?
Well, clearly.
Okay.
Are you questioning it?
No, I'm merely asking you if you agree, sir. I've already indicated to you what our respective roles are here. Now, prior to operating on Zayon, or any patient for that matter, you now see the patient on a certain day, give a diagnosis, an indication for surgery, and now some days down the line is the day of the surgery. Do you ever go back to your patient file prior to the surgery and look over and say, oh yes, Zayon Syed, these are his symptoms, this is what the biopsy report says, or do you just carry on?
I would usually just carry on, yes.
So you wouldn't go back and check?
No,
So-
usually not necessary. And as I've indicated to you, the indication for Zayon to have an anti-reflux operation was absolutely clear.
And I've indicated to you, let's try and stick to the questions. So at the time of Zayon's operation, in your head, you have a biopsy report that tells you certain things, confirming,
And his symptomatology and his history.
but you have a biopsy report confirming in your mind
Reflux esophagitis.
severe reflux esophagitis and metaplasia. Am I correct? Intestinal
With or
metaplasia.
without metaplasia. Couldn't make any difference.
But in your mind, you were still at that stage under the impression, the time of the surgery, you were under the impression intestinal metaplasia. Am I correct?
Sure.
So, yes.
I'd now like to refer you to Exhibit ZZV, which is the GW7/24. I've given you, it's the loose document that you were provided with this morning. It relates to page 3-501. You can have a look at 3-501 as well if you like and confirm that that's in your handwriting.
Got it.
Okay, if you have a look at either 3-501 or ZZN and you look,
That's B.
sorry, ZZV, my lord. That time it's not the hieroglyphics, that time it is my poor memory, my lord. At 501, under paragraph 2, it says nature of procedure. Do you see that?
Yeah.
It says there, laparoscopic Nissen funduplication for severe gastroesophageal reflux. Do you see that?
I do.
I just want to highlight that the word disease is missing there. Do you agree with that?
You're splitting hairs again. Severe gastroesophageal reflux is not giving it a
And now I'd mind you,
mnemonic as GOR or GORD. We don't tend to do that.
now I'd ask you to go back to 3-507, and I will give you as much time as you need, where I invite you to show the court where Dr. Ray's finding is one of severe chronic esophagitis. 3-507. Do you have 3-507, Mr. Beale?
I'm now at 3-506. I presume I'm about to see 3-507, yes.
Now, if you could go through that and tell us where Dr. Ray says severe chronic esophagitis.
What she says is mild chronic esophagitis with inflamed squamous glandular junction derived mucosa observed. The morphologic features favor reflux associated etiology. No microorganisms identified. And she says there are no features of dysplasia of malignancy.
Do you agree with me she never uses the word severe? Simple yes or no? Does she use the word severe?
If there had been erosion or stricture, she would have called it severe. That's the way they look at it.
There was
And
no erosion.
I've seen this report in many cases, what they call mild chronic esophagitis. Chronic is a significant term. Mild just means it's not complicated.
You see, Mr. Beale, I ask you this question in light of your evidence yesterday and today that the endoscopy is subjectively viewing. The results of the biopsy are objective and more definitive. So here we have a biopsy that says mild chronic with no dysplasia or malignancy. Yet you diagnosed severe chronic. Do you see the difference? A document that you say you only misread about the presence of metaplasia is now clearly again either misread
But I'll point out
or
to you
ignored.
that what I said and what you showed me just now,
Mr. Beale, I'm afraid I must come. It is important for you to allow him to finish the question. It is equally very important for you to be patient with yourself.
I understand, my lord. I'm trying to eliminate all these sideshows you talked about.
I beg your pardon?
I'm trying to eliminate all the sideshows you were talking about.
I don't know what you mean by sideshow. Court proceedings are not sideshows, Mr. Beale. This is not a sideshow. These are.
I didn't bring up
I
that
don't
term.
know how you view criminal court proceedings. Do you think it's a sideshow, Mr. Beale? Is this a sideshow?
Absolutely not.
So please don't interrupt him.
Okay, thank you. Please carry on.
And just, Mr. Beale, to add what his lordship said, it's important that you answer the question. So my question was, considering your evidence that the endoscopy is subjective, you take from the most concerning area, or the area of most concern when you conduct the biopsy, the results which are objective. And in this instance, they say mild chronic esophagitis, where you, in terms of the documentation completed post-Zion's death, say severe, which is different to what was reported to you. And my question previously was intestinal metaplasia the only thing you misread in the document? You said yes. So what I'm trying to get at now is, did you miss mild chronic esophagitis, or did you ignore it?
I certainly didn't miss it or ignore it. My primary purpose was to look at the report and confirm that there was esophagitis. And I'd also point out to you that the document you showed me just now said severe gastroesophageal reflux. I didn't say severe esophageal gastritis, esophagitis. I said reflux. I wasn't differentiating between degrees of esophagitis.
Why did you not use the diagnosis from Dr. Ray's report in your document that you completed upon Zion's death? Because was that not the indication for surgery? Was that not the objective indication for surgery?
Clearly, but to differentiate between reflux and the histological effect of the reflux is both are significant.
And what I would like to highlight to you in the conversations with Ms. Valley, Mr. Syed, and Dr. Kassel, the prominent aspect that you used to justify the surgery was the presence of intestinal metaplasia. Yet even though you were still under the impression the report confirmed it, you did not write it in this document. Do you see it written in the document?
I remember what I said to Dr. Kassel was that there was confirmed reflux esophagitis, and in addition there was intestinal metaplasia.
Let me rephrase my question. Even to Dr. Kassel, knowing that the family had gone there concerned, is the surgery necessary? As a justification for the surgery, you included intestinal metaplasia. On your own version, you've just said you've included intestinal metaplasia. Do you understand that?
I do.
That is on the 8th of October, 3 days before the surgery. Am I correct? You're nodding your head, meaning yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the time sequence. Yes, that's correct.
And at the time of conducting the surgery, you said you've never gone back and looked at the Lancet report. You're still under the impression there's intestinal metaplasia. Do you agree? I'm
Yes,
not saying there's no other indications on your version. I'm saying in your mind, the report still says intestinal metaplasia.
That is so. I'm pleased that you concede there was a main indication.
No, I said on your version. On your version. But anyway, now my point is, in your head, in explaining to the parents and explaining to Dr. Kassel, you say intestinal metaplasia. Upon Zion's death, you are silent on the presence of intestinal metaplasia in the D28 and the GW724. Do you agree you're silent on it in those documents?
It's not included in those documents.
You see, so
The main issue is in the documents.
you see, so what the state will at a later stage argue is at this stage, you knew there's trouble. You knew I cannot now carry on with the lie and say presence of intestinal metaplasia because there was no such metaplasia present. That is what we will argue corroborates the version of the state that you misled Miss Valley and Mr. Syed and obtained uninformed consent to proceed with the surgery. Do you have any comment on that?
No, I've registered your statement.
And I wish to add to you that the same argument will be made in respect of Ethan. That you ignored the biopsy report and proceeded
I've ignored the biopsy report.
Yes, that is the argument that the state will present. You've misled them about the results of the biopsy report and convinced them to consent to surgery that is not required. Their consent is therefore uninformed and led to an unnecessary operation.
Well, I would argue that I did respond to the biopsy report, and that the operation was not an unnecessary operation. It was well indicated, as was the surgery in the case of Zion. I was not in the habit of operating on children without valid indication, and certainly not for the other motivation that was brought forward by the state initially, that is by Dr. Professor Bannister.
If I could refer you to your hospital file ZZM. Lord, the relevant page is 5-73, which is a statement. You have that in front of you?
Sorry, what's the number?
Exhibit ZZM for Mike. That's your hospital file, the same one that we referred to this document, your notes of the 7th of October. It's a few pages later, 5 pages later.
Sorry, what's the page in this file?
Let me interrupt the proceedings. I see there's a uniformed officer, police uniformed officer at the back sitting in the gallery. Are you here to help us as a court order in this court? You're sitting too far back. Come forward, sit there, next to the witness. There's an empty chair for you.
Thank you. I've helped now, but can you just repeat the number of the page?
I just want to make sure that you've got the right bundle. It's not the one that starts every page number with 3. It's the one with exhibit ZZM. You had it.
And I don't show the page.
You had it a short while ago. My Lord, I believe I have indicated page 5-73, the statement.
That's what I had. So what paragraph are you wish to refer to?
My Lord, I wish to discuss the statement in general. Do you see that document?
I do.
The statement?
It's my medical hieroglyphics. No, that's not the one
I think you're on page 5-68 with
correct.
your notes. No, I want you to move 5 pages further. 5-73 is what I indicated. Sorry, 5-74.
Thank you. And then
The one that says statement. Do you see that?
yes,
Okay. So it looks like here the Syed family was billed 12,000 Rand for the surgery of, including the consultation before the time, and the biopsy was billed 12,000 Rand in total for the surgery on Zion. Is that correct?
yeah, that's correct. The Minister of Office would process these sort of things to people with medical aids. Standard practice.
I just wanted you to confirm that. That will be left for argument going forward. If we talk about post-surgery, yesterday and on your first day in evidence in chief, you used the phrase or the terminology, I regrettably and unfortunately left the hospital. Do you recall that? Reluctantly. Regrettably and
I
reluctantly.
said reluctantly. I didn't say the other words.
No, you see what happened is on Thursday when you gave evidence, was it about 12:15 if I recall correctly, you said the words, sorry, just before 3 o'clock, you said the words, I left reluctantly and regrettably. Then there was an interruption and then you changed it and then you said, I left regrettably. And then there was another interruption and then you said, I left. And we went back and listened to the recordings in court. So you can take our word for it. That was your words. And yesterday,
I listened to recordings.
no, we listened to recordings and are not misleading you. You used the words reluctantly and regrettably left the hospital after Zion's operation. And yesterday you again used the term reluctantly left.
I
You
said
dis-
reluctantly left,
And
yes. I was persuaded to leave. and told that everything was okay.
Do you recall right at the beginning I asked you, do you wish there was something you could change in any of these three cases? Do you wish you hadn't left?
In all three cases, I wish there was something that I could change. And in any mortality that ever occurs or may have occurred, clearly one would like to change the outcome of the case.
Okay.
And, you know, you're trying to pin all the blame on myself. Unfortunately, in these sort of cases, it's usually multifactorial.
Right.
And
Mr.
unexpected
Mr. Beale, are you done?
yes, I'm done.
I note you didn't really answer the question, and we will come back to that argument. Do you agree, or what is your view if a person has a pneumothorax, that the assistance that that person should be given, would you describe that as a surgical procedure to remedy a pneumothorax or tension pneumothorax?
It is a surgical procedure, but not exclusively for surgeons.
Do you consider yourself to be competent to remedy a pneumothorax or a tension pneumothorax?
I certainly am, if that's what's required.
You see, your evidence in chief was,
You've got to differentiate capnothorax from pneumothorax.
can that be differentiated without investigation?
Sometimes it can't be differentiated.
I don't have a pressing question, my lord. I didn't really anticipate we would get this far, and I didn't address it with court. My office colleagues have been kind enough to hold a function in my honor today as I'm leaving the office. That function would be at 12:30. I thought we would be done by then, but if we are not, if I might ask that we adjourn even 15 minutes early for lunch, so I don't want to create the wrong impression to my colleagues and not attend my own function, my lord.
Seeing that you did have lunch yesterday, look, Mr. Green, I wonder what they would begrudge you for a lunch before.
Lord, we would never deny the guest of honor presence at his
Yes.
own farewell.
So, that one, now that you did not ask me in time for indulgence, you can't begrudge me for tea, will you?
No,
Your lunch is not yet now.
I would never begrudge the court,
so
my
you
lord,
could wait. We adjourn.
as the court orders. I only found out this morning.
Here we are, Mr. Green. Mr. Beale is under oath. Mr. Robin, please proceed. You don't want to miss out on lunch, do you?
Mr. Beale, would you describe Zion's surgery as difficult in any way?
It was made more difficult than the average case, which would have been usually much younger and with normal body habitus. So the fact that he was quite overweight for his size and age did compound the surgery and extend the time of the surgery. Now, I mean, the time that it takes to do an operation is not a critical factor. And different people describe different mean operating times. This was certainly over my personal mean operating time. But I wasn't the quickest. And we did these procedures with great care and meticulous detail. So the thickness of his abdominal wall, the one factor. I think one then has to have, insufflate so that you've got sufficient space inside the peritoneal cavity, and one introduces something that I mentioned before, a Nathanson retractor. And in Zion's case, I'd actually imported from one of Netcare's other clinics an adult-sized Nathanson retractor because Parkland Clinic only had a pediatric one.
Mr. Beale, I've asked you previously, we don't need you to repeat the evidence that you've already told us. My question quite simply was, did you classify the surgery as difficult?
I'm explaining why it was a procedure that was more difficult than average, but we proceeded and completed the procedure to my satisfaction.
In your mind, what does the word transient mean? A transient period. What does that describe?
A transient means temporary, something that passes, a passing period of time.
You've already indicated that there was a pause in the surgery. Is that correct?
Yes, we have acknowledged and indicated that and discussed it.
And you indicated that you accept that you described the surgery as uneventful. Am I correct?
The surgery itself is uneventful, yes.
If you have a look at Exhibit ZZV, my lord, it was submitted today. It was the transcript of 3-501. Do you have that? It's a loose leaf document that was handed to you today, ZZV.
No, I'm not aware of such a document, no. These are my stuff.
It is in the file behind 501, apparently, 3-501. If it makes it easier for you, you can look at 3-501.
3-501.
That is the handwritten version, where ZZV is the transcribed version. Do you have it?
Not just yet. I have it now.
Do you go down, do you have the handwritten one or the transcribed one?
I have a typewritten transcribed one.
Okay, that's perfect. If you go down to paragraph 5 on that page, therapy prescribed during the procedure.
I have that.
You see there, standard anesthesia, goes on, transient period of decreased blood pressure, reported by anesthetist and tachycardia. See that?
I see that.
Okay, I just want to highlight that corroborates Dr. Elliott's version that she said that there was a tachycardia that everyone was aware of. Do you agree with that?
I don't know that you are referring and Dr. Elliott is referring to the same. This was at about an hour and a half into the procedure.
Okay,
Dr. Elliott then referred to something right at the termination of the procedure.
Okay.
If it's one and the same.
Can you show this court in any document where it indicates a pausing of the procedure on the request of Dr. Munshi? This document. this document or any other document that is currently before the court that says there was a pausing of the procedure based on Dr. Munchi's concerns?
That pausing of the procedure for a relatively short period of time did occur and is reported. I don't know exactly where in the documents or files it may be reported, but it has been reported and acknowledged.
Okay, I will leave it for argument that that is not in the file anyway, but we will debate that in argument. And you said it was a 5 to 10 minute period of pausing of the surgery, is that correct?
Are you getting that from the file?
No, that was your evidence. Your evidence in chief was after 5 to 10 minutes, Dr. Munchi said he was satisfied and we could continue.
Correct.
Okay, so you were aware at that stage that there was some concern by Dr. Munchi, am I correct?
There was a transient period of concern by Dr. Munchi, yes.
Okay. In your expertise, is a pneumothorax something that should be left undiagnosed and untreated?
Well, once again, it's a question of pneumothorax, capnothorax. Capnothorax occurs not infrequently in after laparoscopic procedures, and the majority of them do not require treatment, because carbon dioxide resorbs fairly rapidly, and it's in fact seldom required intervention or treatment of the capnothorax.
But surely it requires diagnosis. My question was diagnosis and treatment. If I understand correctly, if a patient has a possible pneumothorax, among the factors in assessing this child, the patient, diagnosing the child, is determining if it is a pneumothorax and then determining if it is a capnothorax, because the treatment would be different. There was talk about clean air pneumothorax and capnothorax. You can't just have an anesthetist say, I suspect a pneumothorax, and think to yourself, well, it's obviously this, and walk away. Somebody has to check the patient. Do you agree?
Certainly. The anesthetist says he suspects a pneumothorax.
And
It wasn't the case at this stage that we're referring to.
Okay, we will get to that stage. But do you agree that a pneumothorax can become fatal, can become a tension pneumothorax, and ultimately lead to death?
Tension pneumothorax can do so, yes.
And a pneumothorax develops into a tension pneumothorax if not treated. Am I correct?
Not necessarily.
But it can.
Yes. As said, capnothoraces usually don't develop. In fact, it's thought that capnothoraces never cause tension. And they may require a drain or needle, but usually when you terminate insufflation abdomen and stop carbon dioxide insufflation, the capnothorax will reverse and resolve. And it's thought that maybe a number of patients have a bit of a capnothorax that's never recognized.
Okay, you heard Dr. Elliott's evidence, and you said that never happened. Am I correct? There was never mention of a pneumothorax.
That is correct.
You heard Dr. Elliott's evidence, or in Dr. Elliott's evidence, she was confronted with a document which is Exhibit ZZL, contained at case lines 5-62, 5-62 ZZL. She was confronted with that document in cross-examination.
I don't have that document, I'm sorry.
And 5-62 is the...
Not just X2.
5-62. That is her note. It is a typed document. Exhibit ZZL. Do you need assistance, Mr. Beale?
I think I will find what we're looking for in a moment, but it's got to be under X.
No, ZZL is the exhibit number, and the page number is 5-62.
ZL.
ZZL 5-62.
I'm getting there, thank you, Lonnie. So I'll get there in a moment. XXL.
The order limit is probably struggling a little bit more.
ZZL.
You've got it.
I think so, yes.
Dr. Elliott was confronted by that note in cross-examination. And in re-examination, she said she's surprised that anyone has that note, because she said she saved it on her computer and didn't give it to anyone. Do you recall that evidence?
No, I don't.
Well, I put it to you that was her evidence, and my question is, if Dr. Elliott saves a document on her computer and doesn't give it to anyone, and the state also never saw that document,
Lord, what's happening in the background, your Lordship can see.
It's in activity and promotion. What's going on?
That document was given to us by the state. Lord, there's lots of documents in this case. We don't begrudge anybody for not having a clear recollection of where things came from. But, my Lord, before I put that document to Dr. Elliott, I checked with Mr. Boyce and Ms. Alberts where it had come from to make sure that it wasn't going to surprise anybody. And I was told it came from the state, and they had just confirmed that too.
my Lord, I will leave the point until a later stage if we can establish that it did indeed come from us. I will not take it further. I don't want to question Mr. Green's word, but we have no recollection of providing that document, if I could put it that way.
You can proceed.
As the court pleases. Do you recall the evidence of Miss Valley and Mr. Syed, that you met them, you had a discussion with them after the surgery,
Correct.
and their evidence was that Dr. Munshi came out and he said he suspects a tension pneumothorax. You heard that evidence?
I heard the evidence, but it's incorrect.
Okay. Your version, as I understand it, is that you went to the recovery room and Dr. Munshi said to you he suspects either atelectasis or a pneumothorax. That's your evidence under oath, am I correct?
That's correct. He said, in fact, there was decreased air entry on the left side, and that he had requested the chest X-ray, and then he said what what his differential diagnosis was, in keeping with what you've said. And my initial response was that, okay, well, I'll wait for the chest X-ray. And he told me, no, everything is actually okay. Zoun's PO2 was 93, and he wasn't unhappy with his condition at that particular moment. Now, I can tell you that I had never encountered a pneumothorax in one of these operations before. It's very uncommon in pediatrics. If you do get a gas in the pleural cavity, it's likely to be a capnothorax and not a pneumothorax, although we subsequently found at the autopsy that there were both cardiac and pulmonary abnormalities related to an unrecognized viral infection.
I know you disagree with Professors Loveland and Bonigbal, but their evidence was that is a known complication, a pneumothorax. Just placing that on record, I don't expect you to debate me. And
I'm not quite
Lindgren's,
sure what you're referring to.
I beg your pardon?
They said there was no.
They said it was a known complication, including Professor Lindgren.
It's a known complication. It occurs particularly in adults where there's dissection of an hiatus hernia that goes into the mediastinum. When you do this operation below the phrenosophageal ligament and you just mobilize sufficient esophagus to be able to do a wrap around it, the technique described by the world's greatest, largest experience, Rottenberg, which is the technique that I used. That's why I've never seen a pneumothorax in any of these cases before. To say that it's a common problem in Stephen Rottenberg's experience in 2,000 cases, there wasn't a single pneumothorax. And in pediatric practice, it's very uncommon, but it's not totally never reported that you can get that carbon dioxide might traverse between abdomen and the thorax through another route, like a peritoneal pleural canal. So that's not undescribed.
All right,
but it's extremely uncommon.
Mr. Beale, although the state will at a later stage argue that the evidence of Miss Valley and Mr. Syed should be accepted, that the word tension pneumothorax was used, whether or not it is the state's version or your version, prior to leaving the hospital, you knew about the potential of a pneumothorax in Zion. Do you agree?
That was one of the considered issues in Zion. Zion, it was not called a tension pneumothorax, in which case I was certainly not left. And Dr. Munshi persuaded me that I could leave. He said if it was a pneumothorax and it required a drain, he could do that himself. In his training at Baragwana Hospital, he'd done it many times. And I said, well, okay, I'm only 10 minutes away. If he needs a drain or if there's any problem, give me a shout. And I left, and I got to automatic door where I stay at the moment, then and now. And I received a call from Zaire Valley to say that things were not going well and that I should return. And I backed out and I went straight back to the hospital. En route to the hospital, she phoned me another 2 times and I said, don't worry, I'm on my way.
All right, Mr. Beale, again, there's no need for you to repeat that portion of the evidence. You can just deal with the issues. On your behalf, when Professor Bonigbal, and if I recall correctly, Professor Loveland gave evidence, they were confronted with a version on your behalf that Dr. Munshi indicated to you that his differential diagnosis at that stage was atelectasis. Only atelectasis. There was no mention of a pneumothorax in the version put on your behalf.
No, he said that it was either possibly a pneumothorax, but not a, he didn't indicate that it was a critical tension pneumothorax at that stage. Otherwise, he thought it might be a left lung atelectasis, and that occurs after an anesthetic where the endotracheal tube is a little too deep, and you get a predominantly right lung anesthetic.
Do you agree with the argument that in spite of Zion's myocarditis, in the absence of the tension pneumothorax, he would have survived?
I think his myocarditis was very contributory, and that was the opinion of Professor Christina Lundgren, that the main cause of his demise was in fact his myocarditis, or a large contributory cause.
Absent the tension pneumothorax, do you believe Zion would have died?
Had he not had a pneumothorax?
Had he not had a tension pneumothorax?
You know, my colleague Dr. Munshi put needles into that chest, and that's such a simple thing to do, and it takes seconds, not minutes. And there was no response. He then put an intercostal drain in, and it was, though it bubbled and seemed to decompress, there was no dramatic response to that. Then I arrived, and because of that, I put in a second intercostal drain into that autopsy. Both those drains were in fact adequately in the pleural cavity, and there was not a dramatic release of air when I put my drain in, and I think that Dr. Munshi had successfully drained the pneumothorax, and the next thing was that Dr. Munshi decided that he should re-intubate Zion, and on re-intubation, Zion did have a cardiac arrest, and I was there, and we immediately started external cardiac mass until resuscitation. Then Dr. Khan came.
Dr. Beale, I've asked you previously not to repeat your evidence, but to answer the question. The question was quite simply, do you believe absent the tension pneumothorax, Zion would have died? Yes or no?
If he not had a pneumothorax, whether he would have died.
If he did not have a tension pneumothorax?
I'm not a prophet, I can't say whether he would have died or not. I don't think any of us can.
In your mind, is a pneumothorax something that needs urgent attention, or is it something that can wait?
hypertension pneumothorax needs urgent attention, yes.
And in normal pneumothorax?
As I've said to you, if you've got a capnothorax, the majority will resolve and resolve without intervention.
You see, even on your own version, you knew the potential of a pneumothorax. Not yet diagnosed on your own version, but suspicious of a pneumothorax, and you left the hospital. Do you understand that? Do you agree with that?
I've explained to you what happened, yes.
You see, the state will argue at that stage you abandoned Zion. You knew there was a potential problem. You regrettably left. Your own words, you regrettably left. Did you examine Zion after you were told about the possible atelectasis or pneumothorax? Or did you merely take Dr. Munchi's word, I'll get an x-ray, check, I'll call you?
Well, I suggested to him that I should stay, and he told me it wasn't required, it wasn't necessary. And obviously in retrospect, and you're also judging things in retrospect, I wish I had not left.
You see,
hindsight is always much easier.
You see, how I understood the evidence presented by the state, a pneumothorax is an emergency situation. Do you agree with that?
The pneumothorax?
Yes.
Not necessarily. We've gone through, what it's likely to be under those circumstances, which most likely to be a capnothorax.
Okay, but you've agreed.
And very few of those need to be treated.
But there still needs to be a diagnosis. Do you agree? So in other words, you can't just leave. You've agreed to that. You can't just leave thinking, oh, it's probably this, I'll go. It needs attention of some sorts, whether it's investigation or treatment.
Yes.
It needs attention.
An x-ray had been ordered and it was awaited.
So you disagree with the state witnesses when they say an x-ray is not the diagnostic tool of choice? Do you disagree with them? Their evidence is all on the same form.
It depends upon the state of the patient, in what sort of state the patient is, how urgent it is or isn't.
You see, at this stage, are you not still the primary treating doctor of Zion? You're his doctor, am I correct? Mrs. Valley, with her son and her sister, came to see you, asked you for help. You said, I will help you. Do you agree?
I agree.
Now, you stand in a recovery room and you get confronted with something is wrong. That remains. Whatever the differential diagnoses are, something is wrong. It's either this or it's either or this. You say, okay, I'll wait. He says, no, it's fine, you can go. Would a cautious, as you've described yourself, reasonable pediatric surgeon not rush to the aid of his patient to investigate? You described him as your precious patient. You do not rush to your precious patient and see what is going on.
Well, if there's something that requires intervention immediately, then you would.
And you didn't know if there was something that required intervention, and the state will argue the reason you didn't know is because you abandoned your precious patient. Do you have any comment?
I didn't abandon him. I left briefly and I came back.
And the time that you were away, the damage was done, am I correct?
I don't think anybody could actually say the damage was done. We've got an expert witness on this case who claims that he thinks the damage was done before Zion left the operating room.
Who are you referring to?
Professor Andre Kutsia.
All right. But on your own version, we will deal with Professor Andre Coetzee when Professor Andre Coetzee comes to court. But on your own version, you left. You're told, and remember, this isn't an operation that, for all intents and purposes, has been perfect. This is an operation that was paused by the anaesthetist, according to your own version. That there was a transient period. There was a tachycardia. Now you hear there's a problem. You say, I'm out of here, and off you go. Is that reasonable?
Say that, I said, I'll wait in the tea room and wait for the x-ray.
But you left.
He dismissed me, so I went, yes.
Why didn't you go to your precious patient?
Because there was not a dire necessity at that time. He reassured me that the PO2 was 93 and there was and that Zion was stable. And you asked me, would he not have died if he hadn't had a pneumothorax?
If you go back,
And I can say, would he not have died if he didn't have a myocarditis?
my comment on your answer is two things. You say it was not dire. You had the opportunity to go and check for yourself, is it dire? You didn't. You left.
Are you suggesting I should have disregarded or disbelieved Dr. Munshi?
What I'm saying, Professor Beale, is the state will argue you, as a cautious, reasonable pediatric surgeon, have just conducted an operation that was eventful, that was paused 4 hours long, that was described as difficult. You get information, there's a problem with the airways. You get told, I'm getting an x-ray. You should have gone to your patient. You should have gone and assessed your patient. You say there was nothing.
It's incorrect to say there was a problem with the airway. Problem with the lungs, possibly, yes.
Problem with the lung, but be that as it may, you left. You say at that stage there was no indication of it being dire. The fact that Zion was dead not long after that paints a different picture. You're in the recovery room. You can't be more than 2 meters away from your precious patient when you receive this report. And you don't even look at him. You don't go and touch him. You don't go and listen. You leave him. You abandon him. And the point I
There are
want...
several expert witnesses, including Professor Lundgren, who have the opinion that the responsibility at that time is that of the anaesthetist. The responsibility of reversal of anesthesia and treatment in the recovery room is the responsibility of the anaesthetist. And you are speaking with hindsight. It's easy to be wise with hindsight.
I just want to understand, when you say it's the responsibility of the anaesthetist, you, as the person who Miss Valley and Mr. Syed put their faith in to save their son from this miserable life that you describe, say, in a recovery room where there's an anaesthetist and the surgeon who performed the operation, if there's a problem there, your hands are clean. The anaesthetist must be left to his own devices, sink or swim, death or survival. I've done my job. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not the case.
Suggest that perhaps Mr. Rubin should ask a question that is factually based without the narrative of sink or swim and death and life. It's becoming rather prosaic question.
My Lord, I thought my question was fair. If I'm required to rephrase it, I will.
I can't find fault to you because the president is there.
Mr. Court pleases. Do you wish to answer?
Sorry, what's the question now?
I will phrase.
Whether I should have left or not.
No, I will phrase it to you. Did you not listen to my question?
I'm listening to you all the time, yes.
Okay.
But there are several questions in what you are saying to me.
All right. You've said expert evidence, or that it is the anaesthetist's responsibility. You agree with that?
They do. I don't know. Professor Bannigal says that the surgeon has the ultimate responsibility for everything. Anaesthetists don't agree with that.
You see, we're not talking about ultimate responsibility. What I want to establish from you, based on the view that on your view, that the anaesthetist carries that responsibility post-operatively. Are you saying, you yourself, not their view, your view, is if you are in a recovery room with a patient of yours and the anaesthetist says to you, there is a problem, that you are in essence saying, it is your problem, my hands are clean?
Well, that's not what I said at the time. And I would have preferred, and I volunteered to stay until the X-ray was done. And Dr. Munshi at the time persuaded me to go, and he said it wasn't necessary. In other words, there was no dire concern about Zion at the time. And with hindsight, and you're also talking with hindsight, I wish I hadn't gone down the road and come back again.
Mr. Beale, do you need your anaesthetist's permission to examine your own patient in an emergency situation? Do you need his blessing?
He didn't regard it as being an emergency situation at that time. No, I don't need an anaesthetist's permission to examine the patient.
So there was
I
nothing...
was standing at the door of the recovery room, and he was the person inside, standing next to the patient.
So you agree you could have, if you wanted to, there was nothing stopping you from offering assistance to your precious patient?
I did offer assistance. And despite that, he said he didn't need my assistance at the time. But I did offer, and I offered to stay there until the X-ray was done.
You see, Professor Beale, the state will argue at a later stage that there's a general trend amongst your evidence about all three deceased and about your prosecution in general.
All three cases over 12 years.
Correct. The general trend that your evidence has shown is it's anybody but you who's at fault. That's an
Sorry?
anaesthetist who's responsible.
Anybody but?
Except for you. You carry no responsibility. You would change nothing, you said. And
I
you're
never said that, and it's not true.
And you're constantly putting the blame at the door of others. You've gone as far as to accuse Miss LaRue of scratching around for other cases.
Well, that's the fact.
And we will ask the court to draw the necessary inference on that. The further point that the state will argue that has been shown is you have a history in all three patients of abandoning them. With Ethan, you left the hospital. With Alyssa, you carry on with the further procedure, even though the anaesthetist is called out. With Zion, you go home, you leave the hospital. It's as if you say, my job is done, the responsibility is somebody else, and you walk away.
Well, let me start with Alyssa and say that I didn't leave the hospital until after the demise of Alyssa.
Mr. Beale, if you'd listened to the question, I never said you
As
left
far
the hospital.
as Ethan is concerned, I was there for 4 hours or 5 hours until after 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, until Dr. Obor assured me that the patient was intubated and she was satisfied with his condition. I could have stayed there all day if there was a problem, but there was apparently not a problem. So I don't accept your accusations.
As the court pleases, my lord, I have no further questions.
Just indicate to me what time period you suggest we should attend to accommodate your last day in office in this place.
My lord, I have indicated to, it's not my last day, I will still be back in court next week, just...
Fair enough, I'm talking about today, please.
Yeah. My lord, I have indicated to my colleagues that I am busy in court and we are running out of time court-wise, so they understand that I might arrive after 1:45. So I'm not sure.
I want you to accommodate you. The matter is not about to be concluded anytime soon.
I'm not sure.
Green had no issue with it, neither do I.
My lord, I'm not sure if Mr. Green has an indication of how long he will be with the witness. And if he's going to be longer than 15 minutes, perhaps we could adjourn now then to allow me to attend.
Mr. Lord, I can't give Mr. Regan a guarantee I'll be done in 15 minutes. I do my best, but I can't guarantee. I don't want him to be late for this matter.
No, fair enough, but you can at least give an indication, not a guarantee, an indication. What do you think?
I think I'm on the wrong side of 15 minutes.
You've got the wrong side of 15 minutes. Can we then again, let's have a daily lunch, enjoy your last formal lunch. We can see you at what time?
The normal time would be fine, my lord. 2 o'clock would be fine, my lord.
In the long run, Mr. Beale, I'm sure you also will come and play with this one.
Thank you, madam.
That's okay.
Ian, if I had a time machine, when you asked me, where's my invite, I would reply.
After lunch.
I just want to place on record that the issue of Dr. Elliott's blocking, there was a misunderstanding on our part and it had in fact been provided. So although I didn't openly accuse anybody at that stage, I was about to, but I just for record purposes want to return the favour of saying we apologise for what we thought.
Mr. Green is cleaning. Yes. The Lord, we've all apologized. We all accept it. Here we are. Any question?
Yes, thank you. Professor Beale, you were shown a printout from the HPCSA's website which records your registration status as being suspended. Could you tell His Lordship, was there a disciplinary hearing that resulted in your suspension?
No, my lord, there wasn't.
Did you voluntarily agree to suspend your registration?
As a pediatric surgeon, yes. And the only communication I got from the HPCSA is in fact what I handed to you earlier today.
Yes, you were then asked in the context of the cases about a significant amount of blood loss, and the emphasis being on significant, and you were then...
In which case, I'm so sorry.
Yes, my Lord, this is in you can choose. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Lordship's pardon, Stratum.
And this is Stratum.
Yes. If there is a loss of blood intraoperatively, should the anaesthetist take steps if that is required?
The anaesthetist certainly should, particularly when forewarned and asked to do so by the surgeon.
And do you know whether one of the steps that an anaesthetist would take if there is blood loss would include the administration of fluids?
Yes.
Are you able to tell His Lordship what the administration of fluids would do in the context of blood loss?
Would expand the circulatory volume The amount of clear fluid given was 900 cc's.
Then, could I ask you to be given Exhibit ZK, please, Professor Beale? Baseline 3-967, Lord, it's Nurse Ramji's statement. Professor Beale, that is nurse.
The report. The order disappeared. Okay. Please don't
Professor Beale, you were asked questions about how many times Dr. Blazowski left the theatre in Alyssa's operation. And there you have before you Nurse Ramji's statement of 3-967. If you just cast your eye through the statement, she starts in paragraph 4 with Alyssa arriving and then describes what happened, what Alyssa's stats were. It says in paragraph 6, Nurse Gordon and Dr. Blazowski left. Paragraph 7, she says that Alyssa was stable, but at 19:10 the SATs dropped. And she then recalled or asked Nurse Mhlungu to call Dr. Blazowski. And in paragraph 8 then says Dr. Blazowski arrived in the recovery room. She carries on there. Does that assist you in telling His Lordship how many times Dr. Blazowski was called out of the surgery that followed Alyssa's surgery?
It does, my lord. That's how I recall it.
Then, could you tell His Lordship, again sticking with Alyssa, the drawing of a hemoglobin or a blood sample for hemoglobin testing post-operatively. In that context, could you explain to His Lordship what a baseline hemoglobin would be for a surgeon? The phrase baseline hemoglobin, could you explain that?
For a surgeon, you mean post-operatively?
Yes.
Well, one would hope not to have a hemoglobin that's below, so 8 or 9. Baseline is regarded as being 7, as hemoglobin of 7 gram percent, which would require transfusion. If that was a stable hemoglobin, in terms of transfusion for repleting the blood loss. If it's in association with hemodynamic disturbance and a degree of shock, then it's more urgent to transfuse or to give something other than crystalloid.
Then, still sticking with Alyssa, you referred to the results of the blood gas analysis that was conducted in 2038. Do you have a view on the relevance of the glucose and the potassium level and whether they played any role in Alyssa's death?
Well, certainly, both levels are really incompatible with life. The glucose level was 1. The potassium level was 9.6, which is essentially, I mean, it's more or less incompatible with life.
Then you were asked some questions by Mr. Rubin about saying to Mrs. Tubes that sometimes it's the mom that needs sedation, and you were asked whether that was in a one-on-one, face-to-face discussion with Mrs. Tubes, because she had said that it had happened on the telephone. Now, Mr. Rube cross-examined Mrs. Tubes, but can I ask you this, in the proceeding, preparing for this case, did you consult with, amongst others, Mr. Rube to prepare for the cross-examination of Mrs. Tubes?
I don't believe so, but
Professor Beale, you and I have spent many hours together as a team.
yes,
We've consulted, have we not?
yes we have.
And during those consultations, did you tell Mr. Rue and myself that call was face-to-face or on the telephone?
Well, it was face-to-face on the evening prior to
Listen to the
Ethan's
question,
surgery.
Professor Beale. Did you tell
Yes.
Mr. Rue and myself that discussion happened face-to-face or on the telephone?
It happened face-to-face, so I would never have stated any other way.
Then could I ask you just to orientate you? Could you turn up 3-163? It's the GW24/7 form in Ethan's case. I'll give your lordship the exhibit number in a minute. Lord, it's exhibit C.
Case line page.
3-163. Now, you were referred to this document, Professor Beale, and it was in the context of the debate about Hirschsprung's disease and hypoganglionosis, and you said to Mr. Rubin that they are alike, and he pointed out to you that in this form you have referred to Hirschsprung's disease. Could I ask you in that context to now turn to Exhibit Y at page 3-814.
Outside of this file.
Mr. Boyce will help you.
3-814. This one doesn't go that far. Sorry. Thanks.
Now that's the statement which you prepared dealing with the treatment of Ethan Tubes, and in the, I suppose, what is the fourth paragraph on that page, the one that starts with the date 12/3/12, you have that paragraph? I'm sorry, I can see you have the wrong document in front of you.
3-81.
3-814.
4. Now, I have got that document, thank you.
Is that a typed document?
Yes.
Yes. The fourth paragraph on the page, or perhaps the third one, depends how you count them. The one that starts 12.3.12, do you have that paragraph?
Yes.
At the end of that paragraph, well, you say rectal biopsy was done under general anesthesia, done 2cc-2cm above the dentate line, confirm aganglionosis /hypoganglionosis. Could you explain to His Lordship what you are referring to using the phrase aganglionosis, hypoganglionosis?
Well, that would refer to the fact that the initial report from the pathologist was no ganglion cells seen at all, so in other words aganglionosis, and it was just on subsequent repeated deep sections that she reported occasional ganglion cells. And in consultation with Dr. Geldenhuys, I asked her if this would be, in her opinion, in keeping with hypoganglionosis, a variant of Hirschsprung's disease, and she agreed that it was in keeping with hypoganglionosis.
Then sticking with what it is and your reference to Hirschsprung's disease and hypoganglionosis being alike, could I read to you what Mr. Tube said at the HPCSA hearings, and could you then tell his lordship whether that accords with your description of hypoganglionosis and Hirschsprung's disease being alike? And what it is, it's Mr. Farrell who's cross-examining Mr. Tubes. He says, Lord, for my learned friends, it's at page 121 of the transcript. Mr. Farrell says to Mr. No, my Lord, it's not before your Lordship. It's the transcript of what happened at the Health Professions Council. And your Lordship did not hear from Mr. Tubes, who was on the State's witness list. I want to...
May I just inquire from my learned friend, what would be the purpose of this line of questioning, seeing the fact that Mr. Tubes never testified, and that portion is not? So I would just like to know what is the relevance of this line of questioning.
Yes. Well, I'm happy to answer that question. Professor Beale was asked at some length about the difference between Hirschsprung's disease and hypoganglionosis, and he said that they are alike. He was taken to the document, the GW 724, to say you didn't refer to hypoganglionosis, and I now want to ask him whether what Mr. Tube says accords with his understanding of Hirschsprung's disease and hypoganglionosis being alike. It goes to the heart of one of the main issues which the state raised. I don't present it for the truth of what Mr. Tube says, just to ask Professor Beale whether it accords with his understanding.
How do I assess evidence of Mr. Chu if it was not in front of me? So that's what I'm betting.
Of course, your Lordship is for the reason for which I asked the question does not require your Lordship to assess Mr. Tube's evidence, because as I said, I don't ask and won't ask your Lordship to decide whether what Mr. Tube said is true or not. It is to ask Professor Beale whether, if Mr. Tube said this, how does that reconcile with his understanding of the two, hypoganglionosis and Hirschsprung's disease being alike.
And that part of the report is not in front of me. Am I right?
It can be put, my Lord, it can absolutely be put before your Lordship, but your Lordship has got so much paper in this matter.
Yes, I do, and not only do I do, I've been at pains earlier on and throughout to suggest this idea to cancel hearings outside of this platform unless relevant. Surely should not be, evidence cannot be admissible if it's relevant. So that's how I look at it. So they just go back and address me in relation to the concern that Mrs. Rose is raising.
Well, she says she doesn't know why it's relevant, and I've explained to your Lordship it goes to the point that was taken up with Professor Beale about there being a difference between Hirschsprung's disease and hypoganglionosis. Him saying they are alike, that was the phrase. And I've taken Professor Beale to the document where he referred shortly after the event to aganglionosis. And now I want to ask him whether something that somebody else said accords with his understanding of alike.
Just help me understand.
To whom is that statement attributed to? Who said that? What you suggest was whether what was said before the HPC
It's
goes with his understanding. Who's that?
Mr. Tubes.
The father. Is the father medical doctor?
His father.
Okay. So, can you perhaps repeat it for me to understand
Lord,
what you're
I-
suggesting?
There is a point taken up with Professor Beale
Yes.
about the difference between Hirschsprung's disease and hyperganglionosis.
Mhm.
He has told your lordship that he discussed it with Dr. Geldenhuys, who said it was hyperganglionosis, and that he made an election not to convey that further discussion to the parents. And in the course of that, he said to Mr. Rubin, they are alike.
Yes.
I now want to ask him whether what Mr. Tube said, not whether it's true what Mr. Tube said, but whether what Mr. Tube says accords with his evidence of they are alike.
So your friends are sending a note to
Yes, my lord, if I may have a moment.
You do have my permission.
No, and of course, Mr. Rue is absolutely right. He makes a simple, an obvious point, which I should have seen. The evidence of Mrs. Tubes is that both she and Mr. Tubes consulted with Professor Beale. So they both have an understanding as well.
Is there still an objection?
I certainly have an objection in the sense that the evidence of Mrs. Tubes was quite clear, is that the difference between Hirschsprung's and hypoganglionosis was never explained to them by Mr. That's the first issue. The second issue is Mr. Tubes never testified before this court. We don't know what is the context within which he was cross-examined. I still have to look at it now. And then, I don't know, what is the court really going to do with this? Can't the witness, out of his own accord, explain what he understands with the similarities between Hirschsprung's and hypoganglionosis? The same objective can be obtained without reference to the HPC's case.
Out of abundance of caution, I am going to permit, however, subject to the following caveat. Obviously, when everything is said and done, eventually, I reserve my views in relation to whether this is in fact admissible or not. I'm doing so that Mr. Beale shouldn't be prejudiced by ruling it. I'm open-minded. I must be quick to point.
I just want to make sure, my lord, to which page reference my learned friend is going to refer to.
It's at the foot of page 121.
Thank you.
Yes. Lord, I'm indebted to your lordship, and we understand that the ruling on admissibility is that it's provisionally admitted, subject to your lordship's final decision later on. Yes. Professor Beale, this is Mr. Farrell asking questions of Mr. Tubes, and I'd like you to just recall your evidence about the two being alike, and then my question is does what is said here accord with what you are saying to his lordship about the two being alike? Mr. Farrell says to Mr. Tubes, yes, well at that time, and that's the consultation time, shortly thereafter, you understood it to be the disease that I have now explained to you twice, yes, of a nerve problem to a portion of the colon that developed as a problem from birth, correct? The answer is yes. Mr. Farrell, we have established that, yes. So your understanding of Hirschsprung's disease was just that. Whatever the textbook definition might be, and whatever its multiple variants might be, is not for you to say. Your understanding was that it is, I am almost tempted to say, a disease of a portion of the colon that needs to be removed because it is not getting proper nerve supply. And the answer is, yeah. Could you tell his lordship whether that accords with your description of the two as being alike.
Yes, my lord. Can I read a short sentence from Prem Puri? No.
Professor Beale, you should read it. It's your case if you wish to read something. I'm not asking the question, but...
It will take half a second. Even though the median age of diagnosis is significantly higher in patients with intestinal hypoganglionosis and those with Hirschsprung's disease, the symptoms of intestinal hypoganglionosis resemble classic aganglionosis.
You referred to, you clearly written in the judgment, is this the exhibit that was introduced right early in the beginning of this trial? Is that correct?
Lord, it seems to be, Professor Beale has read from the Prem Puri article. Your Lordship will just give me a moment, I'll find the...
This is it not in 3-805?
It's whispered from behind me, Exhibit W, 3-797. And Professor Beale, could you, using the internal, if it has internal page numbering, just identify for his Lordship where that bit that you have read appears?
I read the last page. In fact, it starts at 3-797. But where was he reading from?
I'll ask the witness. Professor Beale, where did you read from? Could you use the internal page numbering on the article to identify where?
This is an article I happen to have with myself. It's not out of one of the files.
Yes. Does it have a page number in the top right-hand corner? Use the second page, if you will.
I think the page is 1112. The page that I've read out of is 1113.
Yours is slightly differently numbered. Professor Beale, let's do this to help his Lordship. Could you give to his Lordship the heading that appears above the paragraph where you have read?
Clinical presentation.
Yes, Lord, I think
This may not be the same article as is in the records.
My Lord, with your Lordship's leave, may I ask Mr. Boycer to approach Professor Beale to see what it is he's
You
read?
will come to approach him. You are near him.
Yes, well, Professor Beale has read from something that is not before your Lordship yet. I'm going to return this document to you. Thank you. Professor Beale, sticking with Ethan tubes and the hypoganglionosis, Hirschsprung's disease, distinction. When you decided not to tell Mr. and Mrs. Tubes of hypoganglionosis, did you mean to cause harm to either Mrs. Tubes, Mr. Tubes, or Ethan Tubes?
Absolutely not.
Would you then turn in Exhibit C to page 3-163? C, my lord.
I have the page number.
What is the page reference now?
3-163.
Yes.
Professor Beale, you were asked questions about Ethan's weight, and you were referred to paragraph 4 where you have circled good as the patient's general condition. Could you go to paragraph 2 on that page? The first line is headed preoperative examination. The second line says general physique and nutrition. Would you read what you have written there?
I wrote, good but behind his twin.
And why did you write but behind his twin?
Because his weight was 12.2 kilograms, and as I recall, it was 2 kilograms less than his twin. So I haven't recorded his twin's weight. That would have been 14.2 or roundabout.
Yes.
And otherwise, I said the rest of his parameters were normal.
Then, Professor Beale, still sticking with Ethan, Mrs. Tubes and you have agreed there was a discussion on Friday the 16th of March where you convey to Mrs. Tubes that Ethan required surgery. There were some questions asked of you about whether there had been earlier telephone calls between yourself and Mrs. Tubes. Could you just tell His Lordship whether there were earlier telephone calls and what you can remember?
There had been earlier telephone calls, yes. And initially Mrs. Tubes phoned me once or I think twice to inquire as to whether biopsy result was available, and I undertook to her that I would phone the laboratory and inquire, and as soon as I did get an answer from the laboratory, I would let her know. And I think it was in the second call to Dr. Gildenas. The first one, she hadn't completed examination of the specimen. On these, the second one she had, and she told me that she'd done pretty extensive sections of the specimens, but she'd seen no ganglion cells. She gave me the impression that she didn't expect to see any, but she would do more and deeper cuts of the tissue, and on further examination let me know what the finding was.
Then, when Ethan was admitted to hospital for the surgery, you prescribed medication that is referred to as clean prep, and you were asked some questions about that. And it was suggested to you that because there had been a response to clean prep, that demonstrates a response to conservative treatment. Could you just tell His Lordship what clean prep is?
Well, there are a number of agents which are bowel prep agents. Clean prep being one, it depends on what, there's another preparation called Go Lightly. There's one that's supposed to be specifically for children, which name I can't recall right now. But the one that was available and the one that we prescribed was in fact clean prep, and it's a pretty stringent purgative agent that will induce diarrhea until it's watery diarrhea, and so doing clear the bowel of any residual fecal material.
Is clean prep perhaps similar to that which some in the courtroom may have experienced when we get older, we have to have colonoscopy?
Yes, exactly.
Could doctors prescribe clean prep on a continuous basis in order to induce normal toileting?
Certainly not.
Then could I move on? You were asked some questions about the possibility of a leaking anastomosis in a pull-through operation, and you said it happens later. Could you tell His Lordship what later means?
Well, I quoted the world literature and said there were I think 3 Chinese cases and 1 Dutch case from Amsterdam, where an early leak was attributed in the Chinese cases to the inexperience of the surgeon, in the Dutch case due to a vigorous bowel washout given soon after the surgery. Other than that, the very small incidents of leaks after this procedure tend to be towards the end of the first week, and there it's a dehiscence of the edges of the anastomosis that occur round about a week post-operatively.
Could you explain to His Lordship what dehiscence is?
Dehiscence is a separation of the anastomosis at that time. Separation of the edges.
Just repeat the term from a benefit.
Dehiscence, my Lord.
Dehiscence.
Yes, Professor Beale, just help me with the spelling. Is it D-I or D-E? I don't recall.
D-E.
D-E-H-E-S-A-C-E.
Yes. And it's a fairly minor separation of the edges of the united bowel from upper and lower extents, and it usually doesn't involve any internal leak of fecal content, and it's a matter of sometimes diverting the flow of content of fecal matter by doing a diverting colostomy and allowing it to heal, or sometimes not necessary at all. It can just be treated locally. But I don't have much of an experience with any complications of that particular anastomosis.
Dr. Beale, in the context of possible leak, you also referred to cultures that were done. Could you, in Exhibit C, turn up page 3/131?
I have that page.
It's a Lancet laboratory report, and the dates are the 1st of April, and the report date is sometime later. Is that the report of the cultures that you referred to during your cross-examination?
It is, my lord.
Yes, would you tell His Lordship what that report tells you as a surgeon?
Well, it tells me that 48 hours after the procedure, firstly there was an amount of fluid, the amount of fluid that one would expect to find in the abdomen, and they measured it as 30 mils, and it was bloody and red. We would call that serosanguinous, in other words, mixture of serum and some blood. And to the extent that it was unsuitable for a cell count, but the gram stain, there were a moderate amount of leukocytes, white blood cells, which would be a response to infection. There were a far greater number of red blood cells, and then there were some bacteria, and there were both gram positive and gram negative bacilli. And then there was a fungal element, and the entire specimen was cultured, and there was a an isolated culture of the fungal element, which is Candida. Candida albicans is a very commonplace fungal organism that occurs in human.
Does that, when you read it as a surgeon, does it offer any indication to you about whether there has been post-operative bleeding or a leak that you refer to?
It would suggest that that is neither. The fact that there are some bacilli needs one to question whether this may have come from the skin or whether, you know, I wanted the opinion of a bacteriologist. We got an opinion from one of the expert witnesses, and his opinion was that these organisms could be translocation through the wall of the bowel after a period of anoxia in the ICU. It certainly doesn't indicate gross infection.
Professor Beale, could you then, sticking with Ethan, turn to give you the page number now, it's Exhibit C at page 351. Sorry, yes, 3-51.
So it's not going to be in this file. Let me look at another one.
Mr. Boyce will come and help you, Professor Beale.
Okay.
It is, my lord.
Thanks.
Professor Beale, if I could draw your attention firstly on page 3-51 to the first entry at 22:30. So it's the third time entry. And what is recorded, it says sleeping on and off, abdomen distended. And that is on the records, the first reference in the nursing notes to abdominal distension. You saw Ethan at about 19:30 earlier that evening. Could
Yes,
you tell
ma'am.
His Lordship, when you saw Ethan, was there abdominal distension?
No, I did not note abdominal distension at that time.
Then jumping ahead to the following morning, you gave evidence that you replaced the nasogastric tube, took out the infant feeding tube and inserted a nasogastric feeding tube, and that it drained 350 mils of fluid. When that fluid drained, did that have any effect on Ethan's abdominal distension?
Yes, it relieved it.
When you say it relieved it, it made it smaller.
Clear, yes.
Could you then, just so you have the reference in Exhibit C, go to page 3-113. It's the Lancet Laboratory report from about 5:20 on the morning of the 31st of March.
Thank you.
The second entry, second result under hematology is a hemoglobin of 11.2. Would you tell His Lordship whether that is indicative of post-operative bleeding?
No, I think not. It's an acceptable level. And Ethan had started off, I think, with a hemoglobin of 11.9. Yes, I'm mixing them up with
Yes.
Alyssa.
Professor Beale, it's been a long time you've been in the witness box. The previous evening's reading was 10.9.
10.9.
Then you asked some questions about calling of a pediatrician and the timing of your call. Could you tell His Lordship, is it normal practice or is it abnormal practice for a surgeon to examine the patient before deciding whether another specialist needs to be involved to take over the care of the patient?
That would be normal practice.
Well, I gave one or the other. Can you tell His Lordship? Is it
Well, to see the patient first, decided what needs to be done, including whether you need to consult the assistance of a pediatrician.
Then you were called at 4:26 in the morning by Nurse Hines. Was there anything that Nurse Hines told you during that telephone call that indicated that you should call a pediatrician without first examining him?
No.
Then, when were you told who the pediatrician on call was? Was it during one of the telephone calls that you had, or was it once you had arrived at the hospital?
No, it's once I arrived at the hospital that I asked the question, got the answer.
Then in that same exhibit, could I ask you to turn to page 3-155? That's the radiology report, which shows the ET tube in the right main bronchus. Professor Beale, when a patient is intubated, if the ET tube is inserted too deeply, does it typically go into the right or the left bronchus?
Right.
And the difference between a tube being too deep or at the correct level, to give His Lordship some indication, is one looking at 1 or 2 centimeters, or are we looking at 10-15 centimeters?
No, 1 or 2 centimeters, one way or the other. And I mean, the question, if it's slightly deep in the right main bronchus and you're ventilating, and there's no cuff on this tube, for one thing, to blow it up so that it's impacted in the air, and it's not down the right main bronchus so far that gas ventilated through that tube doesn't fill the airway and go into both left and right lungs.
And how does one correct an ET tube which is in the right main bronchus? How do you fix it?
Well, it's been fixed at the nose or at the mouth, I forget. Hopefully his was a transnasal intubation because it's more stable. But you just unwind the tape that's fixed it and you remove it. You withdraw it by that length of time, the length of tube.
Is one of the purposes of taking an X-ray post-operatively, amongst others of course, to confirm that an ET tube is correctly sited?
It's a routine practice, yes.
I then move on. You were asked some questions about you no longer working at Mediclinic. It was Professor Loveland who was asked questions about doctors holding privileges to admit patients at hospitals. Did you have privileges to admit patients to Mediclinic?
I did.
And was there a contract between yourself and Mediclinic that allowed that?
I don't think that it's necessarily a stated contract, and clinics will say that you're allowed privileges to admit, but it's their prerogative to whether they continue to allow you to do that or not.
And you referred to prerogative. Did Mediclinic exercise their prerogative and say they would prefer you not to admit patients to Mediclinic?
They did, and it all arose out of my fixing a hernia on the right side of an infant, toddler, I forget exactly how old he was. And this patient unfortunately booked for a left-sided procedure, and on the table there was very obviously a right-sided inguinal problem. And I examined the left side and judged that there was no problem there at all. And so did the indicated side, which was the side that was a problem. And the next patient was a patient that was going to have a soft gel interposition replacement. And this was a major case, and the first little patient with an inguinal hernia went back to the ward, and I unfortunately didn't see his parents straight away. I intended seeing them later.